The champion had the crowd, and he knew it. And a man who knows a crowd belongs to him is a particular kind of dangerous. It was June 1962, and the Arizona State Fast Draw Championship was held that year at the Scottsdale Veterans Memorial Fairgrounds. A long pole barn with sawdust on the floor, and bleachers down both sides that seated 400 men and their sons, most of them in good hats and work shirts, most of them there because fast draw was the thing that summer, and because a man from Tucson named Dale Cord had been on the cover of a shooting magazine twice and had a way of working a crowd that made you want to see whether a man could really do in person what he looked like he could do in photographs. He could. Dale Cord had won 4 consecutive state championships and held a regional record of .21 seconds from leather to target. And he moved in front of an audience the way some men move who have learned that what they do is rare and that the people watching them have already decided it is. He was gracious when it suited him, and sharp when it didn't, and the sharpness was what the crowd had really come for. He was 34 years old, and he had the easy authority of a man who has not been seriously challenged in a long time. Against the far wall, on a folding chair he had pulled out of a stack near the equipment doors, a man in a plain canvas jacket sat watching, with his arms on his knees. He had come in through a side entrance 20 minutes earlier, on his way from a location shoot outside Tempe, and had intended to stay for 10 minutes. He was still there because Dale Cord was worth watching, and because of something else he had noticed on the far end of the bleachers. Here is the story. Emmett Hale had been a stunt coordinator in the motion picture business for 19 years. He worked primarily out of Tucson and Phoenix, and had done location work for 11 different productions between 1943 and 1962. Which meant he had spent 19 years making other men look like they could do things they could not quite do. Fall from horses cleanly, take a punch at the right angle, draw a pistol in a way the camera believed. He was 53 years old, built like a man who had spent his working life absorbing impact, and he had the hands to prove it. The right index finger had been broken in 3 separate places and healed each time at a slightly different angle. And he had learned to work around it the way you learn to work around any permanent inconvenience, which is to say completely and without complaint. He had not worked since February. A shoulder separation on a location shoot outside Flagstaff had put him off the call sheets for 4 months, and the production company that had carried his insurance for 6 years had quietly declined to renew it when the policy came up in March. He had not said anything about this publicly. He was not a man who said things publicly. He had a daughter named Ruth, who was 17 and finishing her junior year at Tucson High, and he had a house note of $94 a month and a truck that needed a rebuilt carburetor. And he had been watching his savings the way a man watches a water tank in a dry summer, with attention, without panic, and with the clear knowledge that attention by itself does not make it rain. He was at the fast draw competition because his neighbor had 2 tickets, and Emmett had known Dale Cord slightly years before, when Cord had done 1 season of stunt work before deciding he preferred competition to production. They had not spoken since. Emmett had come because he had been in the house for 4 months, and it was a Saturday, and Ruth had reminded him that human beings need to occasionally be in the same room as other human beings, and she was not wrong. He sat near the end of the bleachers. He watched Cord work. He did not applaud between demonstrations, not because he was unimpressed, but because he was a man who had spent 19 years knowing exactly how something worked from the inside. And knowing the inside of something changes the way you receive the outside of it. Cord had been working through his demonstrations for 40 minutes when he turned to the bleachers and made the offer he always made at public exhibitions, the one the crowd always loved: $100 cash to any man in the room who could beat him or match him from leather to target. The crowd made the noise crowds make, 3 men tried. They were not slow, any of them. 2 were competitive shooters, and 1 was a rancher from Mesa who had clearly practiced. And Cord beat all 3 with room to spare, and the particular courtesy of a man who knows he will win and has arranged his graciousness so that it reads as generosity rather than condescension. The crowd applauded. Cord looked along the bleachers. His eyes settled on the man in the canvas jacket on the folding chair near the equipment doors. He knew who it was. Most people in that room did, by then. "I imagine," Cord said, and his voice carried easily, "that a man who's made 38 westerns has spent some time with a holster." The crowd went quiet, the way crowds go quiet, when something has shifted from exhibition to something with a sharper edge. The man in the canvas jacket did not move immediately. Emmett Hale, from his seat in the bleachers, had straightened slightly. He was watching the man in the canvas jacket. He had recognized him when he came in and had not said anything, because it was not his business to say anything, and because the man had chosen a folding chair near the equipment doors for a reason that Emmett understood perfectly. Now the crowd was looking at the canvas jacket, the folding chair, the man who was being invited to either stand up or remain seated and let the room read his answer. Cord waited. He was still gracious. He was the kind of gracious that has a clock built into it. Emmett watched. He was very still. If you've ever watched someone be put in a position they didn't choose and had no clean way out of, drop a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. The man in the canvas jacket stood up. He was very tall. He moved the folding chair to the side with one hand, unhurried, and walked onto the floor the way a man walks when he is not performing a rival, just moving from one place to another, the way you do when you have already decided where you are going and the deciding is behind you. He stopped at the line. He looked at Dale Cord. The crowd was silent. Cord's hand moved first, fast, clean, the way 4 consecutive state championships look when they have been expressed through the same motion several thousand times. The man in the canvas jacket did not draw. He watched Cord's hand complete its arc. He watched the gun come level and he looked at it, and then he looked at Dale Cord. 3 seconds, maybe less. The room did not know what to do with what it was looking at. The man in the canvas jacket said, quietly enough that the people in the front rows were the ones who heard it first and passed it back, faster than I ever was. Cord stood with his gun leveled. Something moved across his face. It was not what he had set it up to be. The crowd did not applaud right away. They did something different first, which was a kind of exhale. 400 men releasing a breath they had not known they were holding, because what they had been offered was a contest, and what they had received was something that did not have a clean name, and the feeling of it was larger than what a contest leaves behind. Then they applauded. Cord holstered his weapon. He walked to the man in the canvas jacket and held out his hand, and the man shook it. And then the man turned and walked back across the floor toward the equipment doors. Emmett Hale was standing at the edge of the bleachers by then. He was not sure why he was standing. He was simply standing. The man in the canvas jacket stopped when he reached him. "Emmett Hale," he said. Not a question. Emmett said yes. "I watched you on the Rio Bravo set in '58, the man said. "The sequence with the wagon and the Arroyo crossing. I watched you run that twice, and then I watched the stunt 3 times. There were 6 ways it could have gone wrong, and you'd accounted for 5 of them in the setup and taken the 6th on yourself." Emmett did not say anything. "I've been trying to get the coordinator on my next picture replaced for 6 weeks, the man said. "The man I want is more expensive. The studio says no. I'm going to tell them I'll cover the difference out of my own salary. I need someone who accounts for the 6th thing." He looked at Emmett directly. "It isn't charity," he said. "I need someone who's been doing this long enough to be wrong in a way they can walk away from. You're solving a problem I have." Emmett's jaw moved once. That was all. "Call my production office Monday," the man said. He named the rate, $340 a week, which was $90 more than the last contract Emmett had signed. "Tell them I told you to call." He picked up his hat from the equipment table where he'd set it on the way in. He put it on. He walked out through the side entrance the way he had come in, and the door closed behind him, and the crowd in the bleachers was still making the kind of noise that comes after something you did not expect to feel. Emmett stood at the edge of the bleachers for a moment. Then he sat back down, because his legs had decided that was the appropriate response. Ruth was home when he got back that evening. She asked how it was, and he said it was something. She waited for the rest of it, and he said he thought he had a job starting in August. And she looked at him the way she had looked at him since she was small, with the kind of attention that does not require elaboration. And she said, "Good." Emmett Hale went back to work in August of 1962. He coordinated stunts on 4 productions over the next 3 years, one of them the picture he had been called about, and in January of 1965, he co-founded a stunt safety consortium with 2 other coordinators that developed protocols used on Western and action productions across 6 studios. He retired in 1978 at age 69 with a shoulder that had never been quite right, and a record of 0 fatalities on any set he had coordinated across 34 years of work. Ruth became a physical therapist. She ran a practice in Scottsdale for 28 years and specialized in working with people who had sustained occupational injuries, ranch workers, construction workers, tradespeople who had taken damage doing work that needed doing and were trying to figure out what came next. She told people, when they asked why she had chosen that particular specialty, that she had grown up watching a man put his body in the way of things so that other people could do their jobs safely, and she had wanted to understand what that cost and how to address it. In 1989, the Arizona Stunt Safety Consortium created an annual award in Emmett Hale's name for coordinators who demonstrated outstanding attention to crew welfare. It was a small plaque, engraved bronze on a walnut mount, about the size of a paperback book, and Emmett kept the first one on the shelf above the workbench in his garage in Tucson, beside a broken wristwatch that had stopped on a set in 1957 and that he had never thrown away, because broken things that tell you what time it stopped are not the same as useless things. The plaque was there in the morning light when Ruth cleared the house in 1991. She took it. She put it on the shelf above her own desk at the practice and left it there until she retired in 2014. The workbench is gone. The garage belongs to someone else. But Ruth has the plaque in a box in her closet in Scottsdale, and in it, if you look, is the whole accounting of what a man with a repaired shoulder and a rebuilt carburetor to pay for did with the rest of his years when someone noticed him standing at the edge of a bleacher and did not look away. John Wayne never told anyone what passed between him and Emmett Hale on the floor of that fairground. Not to his director, not to the studio, not to the cast or crew of the picture they made together that fall. Not in any interview, not in any letter. What he said to Emmett Hale, he said to Emmett Hale, and the rest of it belonged to the crowd and to the floor, and to whatever it is that stays in a room after 400 men have been given something they did not know they needed. The measure of a man is not what he does when the crowd is watching and waiting for the draw. It is what he does when the draw is over and the crowd has gotten what it came for, and there is still a man standing at the edge of the bleachers who has not yet been accounted for. If this story reached you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you haven't yet. There are more stories like this one, and every one of them deserves to be told. And unfortunately, They don't make men like John Wayne anymore.